Welcome in to the Go 24/7 podcast. My name is Bryce Koon alongside Glen West. And Glen, we're recording this on Tuesday, September 10th at 4:21 Central Standard Time. That's just for people to know because we don't know when this video is going to be posted because we could be dealing with some hurricane type of weather. So if you're tuning into this on Tuesday night, Wednesday, Thursday, hey, whatever it is. But Glenn, you asked me, I'm about to experience my first hurricane in Louisiana, and you asked him hunkered down, and we were talking. We got all the peanut butter. Big news, was able to get some more diapers, which is huge for our
Good,
household.
good.
And I guess like we're just gonna play. My wife and I are gonna play Scrabble
Yeah,
if the power goes out.
yeah. I'll probably catch up on some Harry Potter books. I'm kind of walking through those for the first time. I'm a big fan of the movies. Watched them a bunch of times, but never read the book. So maybe I can put a dent in a couple of them if we lose power over here. But yeah, everybody stay safe. That's
Mhm.
in South Louisiana. I'm sure Bryce echoes those sentiments. But yeah, it's going to be an interesting next couple days. And up here in Baton Rouge, it really does look like, at least as of now, it's going to be blowing a little bit east of us, so we might not
Yeah,
be getting the worst of it. But again, we're here to preview a game, and we'll hope that everybody kind of gets out of the next couple of days pretty safe.
yeah, and obviously we'll keep it updated how LSU and Brian Kelly are going to handle things as they get ready
Yeah,
to travel to Columbia, South Carolina. And Glenn, let's dive into this game where look, I mean, this is no disrespect, but I think when we looked at this schedule, we did not really circle this game as a opportunity to showcase and make a statement or an opportunity to falter and really put a damper on the rest of the season. But that's what this game has become as LSU gets ready to face South Carolina. The Gamecocks coming off a massive win against Kentucky on the road, 31-6 winners. Their defense shined. It's going to be strength on strength. LSU's offense against South Carolina's defense. A lot of great matchups in this one, Glenn. But kind of going back to what I opened up with, we didn't really picture this being a statement type of game. But for LSU, this really is. I mean, if you can go on the road, play in what's going to be a hostile environment, college game day is going to be there. You don't really have to pump in a lot of the juice. It's already there with this football game.
yeah. I think kind of coming in, maybe some had circled this as maybe a trip up game or one of
Yeah.
those kind of like games where it's like, all right, well, LSU just wasn't ready to play today, and they got smacked around. This has become an extremely important game for LSU in the early part of their schedule. I mean, this is we talk about must wins and all that stuff, and we talked about it 2 weeks ago with USC being a
Yeah.
must win, but I consider this to be, now that you've lost that USC game, just so incredibly important. You cannot lose this opener of SEC play and expect that your season's going to be anything more than a disappointment. To be quite honest, like, you
Yeah.
have to get this game, and because it's only going to get tougher from here. And there's some real potential distractions. I mean, we just kind of talked about it a little bit with the storm and everything, and uh, we 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 don't know exactly how that's going to affect LSU's preparation in terms of practice. We know that LSU is going to be closed on Wednesday and Thursday of this week. Typically, that means that there's not going to be a whole ton of people in the football ops building as you kind of hunker down and kind of get through this storm. So, what that means for the football team, we'll hopefully get some more clarity from Brian Kelly. And by the time you're watching this, you might even know kind of what the plan in place is for this group. But it's it's another one of those deals where you got to have to kind of put it in the back burner and really just kind of hone in your focus on this game, because LSU has to get this one. In South Carolina, it's the first time LSU's gone to Columbia in 16 years. So those fans are going to be juiced. That program's going to be juiced to play LSU in a very hostile environment. I know it's going to be an early morning game, but I would expect South Carolina to show up loud and proud at 11 a.m. On Saturday. And there's some rumblings that there could be some weather issues on Saturday even for this game.
Hmm.
So we got to keep an eye on that. But yeah, how LSU handles kind of the weather stuff this week, I don't think you can really understate how important that is, to kind of get yourselves on the right track and in the right frame of mind, and really focus on a football game here that's going to be extremely important to your long-term season goals. Because now that you're sitting here 1-1, and I think both you and I and a lot of people that have watched this team can pretty confidently say that we have not seen the the best version of this team or even really come close to it. I mean, they've got a lot to prove here over the next couple weeks before we get into that Ole Miss game. But you've got to get to that Ole Miss game first, and you got to get there unblemished. And this is kind of the first big test, I think, for LSU since the way things ended against USC.
It is indeed, and you mentioned getting there. We've all just kind of assumed they would, and now obviously 2 weeks in the season, you can't assume anything. That's the biggest thing I've learned the first 2 weeks of college football. A lot of parity so far, a lot of teams getting upset, and different things of that nature. And like you mentioned, that place is going to be rocking on Saturday at around noon. Glenn, let's kind of start it off with what I mentioned earlier, the strength on strength. So far through the season, South Carolina has had the SEC's best defense in terms of getting pressure on the quarterback and getting home, one of the best in the country, in fact. And then LSU's offense has been insanely efficient through the air. The offensive line has been very good in pass pro. We've just got done talking about the other day that it was not great in the run game, but this is the perceived strength on strength battle. South Carolina's defense against LSU's offense. Kind of walk me through how you look at this matchup and maybe some of the names to watch.
Yeah, I think it's going to be extremely important for LSU to attempt to find some balance. I mean, we have not seen that through 2 weeks in terms of balance between the run and the pass, but I do think that even if LSU goes out and struggles to establish a run game in this one as well, what we've seen from this passing offense, I think, can help carry you through in this game, in this matchup in particular. I really love what LSU's been able to do from a passing perspective. Yes, they haven't taken a ton of deep shots with Garrett Nussmeier to this point, but I think everybody knows that that's in there. Like he can take those shots, and if LSU gets Chris Hilton back, for example, this weekend, and Brian Kelly said earlier this week that he's going to be day to day, so it sounds like he's getting close, but we can't confidently say that he's going to play. But the guy that I've been just extremely impressed with is Xavion Thomas. I mean, that guy is just whenever he gets the ball, you think a big play could be happening. And so I would do everything I could if I was LSU this weekend to try to get him as involved as possible in this game, get him the ball 7, 8, 9 times and let him go make some plays for you. Obviously, we know what Kyron Lacey can do. He's leading the SEC right now in receiving touchdowns. Nussmeier is, I think, tied for the top of the country in terms of passing touchdowns. I feel very comfortable about LSU's ability to move the ball in between the 20s and being able to pick up yards. The question I'm going to have is, can you balance that out at all when the field tightens with a little bit of a running presence? Because the first big matchup you had of the season, you were not able to do that against USC. And I think, this is going to be a front line for South Carolina that you and I were talking about right here from the start before we got on live, that they're going to have a lot to prove. They have some really, they have a 5-star in Stewart who's really talented. They have obviously a 5th-year guy on the other end who's a really talented player who Bryce knows about a lot, having played at Georgia Tech. So there's some talent here, and I think LSU is really going to have to try to find a way to get these backs loose a couple of times, especially down in the red zone. Whether it's a key third down conversion that you run up the middle for a first down or bounce to the outside and pick up some extra yards. That's going to be extremely important here because you can only lean into the passing game as much as possible when everybody knows that you're going to throw it. So I would imagine LSU sees a lot more 4-down fronts. I would imagine that they see a lot of clogged boxes, as Kelly has said. Teams have really elected to give LSU the short passing game, and so far LSU's had some good success with that. We'll see if things change against the Gamecocks, who really like to kind of diversify. I think their plan was talking to a few people, and I think their defense is really kind of more of a 4-2-5 is what I was being told. That they like to kind of mix in some 3-down fronts, but it's going to be mainly a 4-2-5 that LSU sees. So it's going to be a lot of defensive backs out on the field. It's going to be a lot of guys that the holes should be there. Like if they play a 4-2-5, there should be some holes throughout this game for the running game to kind of get going a little bit. But we'll just have to wait and see. And because right now, I don't think you can confidently say that LSU could push anybody around right now in the run game after what just happened with Nichols.
Yeah, and kind of to add on to that, Glenn, we saw so many times, and I go back to spring football, the drills being kind of the walkthrough drills of the screen game, tunnel screens,
Yeah.
midline screens, bubble screens. I mean, any type of screen pass, Joe Sloan has mentioned that, hey, this playbook is very large. This is not a small playbook. I think we could see a lot of that, especially if guys, and you mentioned them earlier, Dylan Stewart and Kyle Kennard on both those edges, they want to pin their ears back and try to get after Garrett Nussmeier. There's an opportunity for a guy like an Aaron Anderson, a Xavier Thomas, Kyron Lacey, and even some of those running backs to really kind of gain some confidence for themselves and kind of, get that early rhythm established, because I imagine that crowd's going to be rocking. Glenn, South Carolina would have loved nothing more than to force a 3-and-out on LSU's first drive, and then that crowd's really into it. And it feels like LSU's got to start off quick in this game on the offensive side of the football.
Yeah, or a turnover because I mean, you look at the stats here. I mean, South Carolina's gotten off to a blazing start. They forced 6 fumbles. They picked 4 passes off. They lead the SEC in sacks with 10. This is a very opportunistic defense that LSU is walking into here. That's riding a ton of momentum, and we've seen it with past LSU defenses. That you start getting that playmaking gene early, established early in your season, it can carry you through the rest of the year. I mean, these guys are playing with a ton of confidence at South Carolina. You can make the argument that Kentucky is maybe not what many people hype them up to be in the offseason, and that's, I think, pretty fair. But this is going to be a big test for that defense, and they know it. And LSU knows that it's going to be in for, I believe it was Brian Kelly or somebody said, a dogfight. They're going to
Yeah.
be in for some really rough, some really pressurized situations here. And you're right, a turnover early in the game, or a 3-and-out, or just some chunky looking offensive drives, and really putting pressure on your defense then to kind of have your back. It's a possibility that this thing could not go LSU's way early on, and they're going to have to fight through some adversity in this game. So we'll see, kind of like I said, what happens. But I do think that this offense is talented enough to move the ball against this defense. I think that they have the playmakers on the outside. Like I mentioned, I think Xavier Thomas is due for another really big game.
Mhm.
Kyron Lacey, I'd like to see Mason Taylor get back to kind of the track that he was showing in that first half against the Trojans a couple weeks ago. And then see what you can get out of the running backs. I mean, I think the biggest thing you got to get out of these running backs is just getting them on the outside, getting them on the perimeter, and seeing if they can't make something happen, miss a tackle, make a guy miss. That kind
Yeah.
of thing is going to be extremely important here, because they haven't shown that they can run the ball inside yet. We'll see if like I mentioned, if the boxes are a little bit lax, or if South Carolina likes to put 7 or 8 against LSU because they've seen it worked the previous couple weeks. So lots to figure out here for LSU over the next couple days, and I'll be very interested to see kind of what the game plan is and how well it's executed in the early goings in their first true road environment.
Wanted to kind of touch on one last thing about LSU's offense there, Glenn, and you mentioned the running backs. Can you make a guy miss? It does bring the question, and BK talked about this on Monday, about what's next for a guy like Jawan Johnson. I mean, was obviously, I think everyone knows at this point, kind of, drinking through the fire hose per se when he was moved to the offensive side of the football. But that kid's a natural talent. You knew that he'd be able to, play off his ability. This is a bigger test. And so I'd be interested to see, what does his workload look like? Caden Durham, another guy, what's his workload look like? Because we just haven't seen Josh Williams utilized a lot. I mean, I don't know your take on that. And then Caleb Jackson has just kind of been in and around. It doesn't feel like, even though Brian Kelly has said, hey, when we needed to get the push, we did. I just don't feel like even the guys that we thought were going to be factors outside of John Emery, who obviously, has had the season-ending injury, we just haven't seen them consistently be that guy or that rotation. And I don't know where that lies. If it's just, hey, straight up, they just dictated what we had to do. But it'll be interesting to see how the workload of kind of those 4 names, what it looks like on Saturday.
Yeah, I think they have talent. Like I don't think the talent is just suddenly disappeared from what we saw for 3 weeks in
Mhm.
fall camp. Like we were every other practice, or every practice we were seeing Caleb Jackson bust the outside for 35, 40 yards and picking up some big gains against this defense for LSU. But look, you got to go out there and do it in the game. And point blank, LSU just hasn't been able to get that push up front. And I know, Brian Kelly talked with us on Monday about how it is kind of a defensive, choice not to allow LSU to get the run game going. But I still think you got to find a way, even if the boxes are stacked with 7, 8 guys, pitch it to the outside, try to find some kind of guy that you can make miss. And we just haven't seen that yet from this
Yeah.
running back group. And you mentioned Juwan Johnson. I think he's a guy that he only played a handful of snaps against Nichols, but he popped. And the way that he popped was they got him on the perimeter. They tossed him the ball on the outside, and he was able to churn up field for 4, 5, 8 yards. I believe the touchdown he scored was a nice little 4-yard route that he took from the backfield and was able to kind of just make a guy miss and get into the end zone. I mean, that's exactly what you kind of need for guys like that. And look, I think Caleb Jackson's a guy that has all the talent in the world. People say he looks a little heavy at 235 trying to make those runs. I don't know. I just don't think we've seen it. Like, we haven't seen him get like into that second level yet to really tell whether or not he's a little chunky. Like, I mean, like he's going into he's going into hit holes and they're just not there. And he's just running into, a stacked line. So like, it's kind of hard to kind of have any kind of evaluation of what he's looked like. And I think he's the guy that ultimately LSU needs to kind of be the workhorse in this backfield. Like, I think Josh Williams is a nice player. He's very good for what LSU wants to do, but he just doesn't bring you that explosive element that Caleb Jackson brings you. And so I think people are already starting to pull out on the Caleb Jackson stock. I wouldn't do that yet. I would not even come close to doing that. I think he's an extremely talented player. And it's just going to be about him and this offensive line and this coaching staff, figuring out ways to open up holes for him and him hitting them and getting into that second level. And we saw it last year in small doses, but when Caleb Jackson gets into the second level, he's hard to bring down. He can truck some guys. He can make guys miss. I'm going to be very interested to see kind of what the game plan is with him. And so, yeah, the run game is going to be extremely important in this one. But I also think that if they don't get the run game off to maybe the way that they want, that this passing offense can carry you through this game and lead you to some success as well.
We flip it over to the other side of the football where, Glenn, I pull up USC's, and I'm calling them USC. I know. They played 2 USC's in 3 weeks. South Carolina stats from this past weekend. Obviously, Brian Kelly praised the play of young quarterback Lenoris Sellers. I don't know how much you've got a chance to watch this kid, an athletic freak, still trying to put it all together. 11 of 15, 159 through the air, 2 touchdowns and an interception. And they're going to run the ball. I mean, that's something also they want to do. They've got Robbie Ashford, the former backup at Auburn, who they've got some packages for that'll run the ball. He had 6 carries. The former Arkansas running back, Rocket Sanders, that LSU fans are familiar with, will be lining up at tailback. And they got a couple other guys as well. But Glenn, I mean, you go back offensively. Yes, they won this game 31-6, but it was their defense that really allowed them to do a lot of things. Just 252 total yards of offense. So I said strength on strength in the other matchup. This feels like, I guess we'll talk about the weakness on weakness for both teams, perceived weaknesses, that is. South Carolina's offense against LSU's defense. Here is a chance. I know Jacoby and Guillory's not going to be walking through that door on Saturday. Here's a chance for Gio Paez, who we talked obviously leading into week 1, wanted to bring a different style of leadership. Well, here's his opportunity to do that and bring that to a room. And obviously, I know you kind of tweeted this out. We talked about it on the message boards yesterday. Dom McKinley, what type of run do they try to give him going forward? You just kind of talk about this matchup, especially up front. I mean, I wrote about the linebackers today. That has to be, you've got to find some type of answers this week, especially against an offense that I don't think can light you up. But as they show, when their defense dominates, they can do enough to win a football game.
Yeah, look, I think we've seen enough from Raheem Sanders over his career, whether it goes back to his days at Arkansas or he's a guy that can be a dynamic playmaker. I mean, he ran for 1,400 yards a couple of years ago, missed some time in the last couple of years, I think, with injuries. So, he's somebody that I think LSU knows very well, has played against him a couple times already in his career, and they know that he can hurt you. Like he's the guy that I think, and that this running game in particular for South Carolina, I think is where LSU is really going to have to hone in on. Sellers is a young quarterback, and I think if you can get some pressure on him, you can limit his effectiveness. He's got a cannon of an arm. I mean, he's got a big arm, and he's probably got a very bright future. Kind of looking at the next couple of years, but this is going to be a really, it's going to be an opportunity for LSU, I think, to get some pressure on him and maybe ease up some of the pressure on the back half of the defense as they kind of make their transitions with guys like Zy Alexander getting some more reps, Sage Ryan moving to safety. I think this is going to be an extremely important game for the LSU linebackers and for this defensive line to kind of run fit Raheem Sanders and not let him get loose. They let Guggenheim, the Nicholls State running back last week, I think run for 150, 145 yards on him. If Sanders has a similar kind of game, he could take a couple to the house, not just one. He could take a couple to the house if he gets kind of loose and LSU's not able to run fit well. So it's going to be extremely important for, like you mentioned, guys like Paez. I would imagine Sean Washington gets a lot of looks. I mean, Kelly pointed him out by name on Monday as the next guy up that took a lot of the reps from Jacoby and Guillory when he went down. And really, I think the big thing that stood out from that answer was that they're just looking for another additional 15 to 20 snaps because Jacobian was not a guy that was going to play 50, 60 snaps in a game. He was going to play, in that 30 to 35 range. So having somebody come in that, can handle a little bit of an extra workload, maybe it's a couple somebodies, maybe it's Kimo Macagnoli, maybe it's JVR Suggs, who handles a little bit more of the workload. Like they have some options back there. I'm not going to sit here and pretend like they're particularly great options. I mean, they're guys, and I think you're hoping at this point that they can, eat up some space and kind of limit the running holes for Raheem Sanders, so that guys like Whit Weeks and Harold Perkins and Greg Penn can kind of help you on the back end there and really help stifle that running game. But really, I mean, and you touched on it here. The big storyline is going to be how do they get Harold Perkins loose? Like how do they unlock this guy? Because we've seen it so many times over his first 3 years or over his first 2 years, the potential impact that he can have on a game. I mean, he won him the Arkansas game in 2022 when really nothing was going right for LSU. As a true freshman, he was the guy that they put in there, and he was able to get sacks and interceptions and passes defended and make in Blake Baker's words, wreak havoc on that team a couple of years ago, and we just haven't seen it since. We haven't seen it put together consistently since, like for a full game. I mean, he'll have moments and he'll have flashes and he'll make plays because that's the kind of dude that he is, kind of player he is. But for 4 quarters, I don't think we've seen a game like that from him since then. And it's just been very surprising how they just haven't been able to quite figure it out yet with what his best role is. And, the more you think about it, the more you kind of wonder just kind of how to fit him in. You could toy with some 3-3-5 sets. I mean, like I would love to see more sets out there with Perkins, Weeks, and Penn. I think those 3 could really help you. But look, fact of the matter is, Perkins has just not been a guy that can shed blocks and can get you, those kind of plays where, if running back's running at him and there's an offensive lineman running at him, he's not been able to shed that O lineman and get after the running back. And you just kind of wonder if maybe they should put him as a more traditional edge rusher, but that means that you have to take, one of Savion Jones or Paris Shand or Braden Swinson or Deshaun Womack. One of those guys has to come off the field, and I think LSU likes all those players, kind of running the edge and kind of being those bigger, thicker bodies that can, shed and take on those blocks and kind of help limit the running game in that way as well. So long-winded answer there, and you can kind of expand on it a little bit because I know you wrote about it, but man, I just don't know how they get Harold Perkins unlocked, because I think through 2 weeks you can make the argument that Whit Weeks has been their best defensive player. And I don't think you can justify taking him off the field, and just kind of where does that leave Perkins?
Yeah. I mean, thought that, it was inspired to kind of write a little bit about this and ask the question on Monday. Jacob Hester had a great segment on Off the Bench here in Baton Rouge about it, and pretty much said, and I would echo this as well. Whit Weeks has to stay on the field. Like, he has been the most disruptive linebacker that you've had at that position. If Harold Perkins, if when you go back and look at what he did when he did make impacts last year, Glenn, it was kind of when they moved him to the star spot. So if you move Perkins to that spot, now you alleviate some of the stress level of Major Burns. I know a lot of people, have their opinions on Major Burns in general, but that just hasn't been what I think they would want it to be through 2 weeks. If you put Perkins there, you put Weeks at linebacker, you keep those two guys on the field as much as you can, then you get the best of both worlds. You get Harold Perkins, who graded out pretty well in coverage last year. Like, it wasn't like he was a liability in pass coverage. You allow him to kind of freelance playoff ball. And then you get Whit Weeks, which I think is his just natural spot. He's aggressive. He has the demeanor, the attitude to play linebacker in the SEC, which is you got to go fight off some blocks, especially, Glenn, when your defensive line isn't all that. When your defensive line is viewed as a weakness, you're going to have to fight off some blocks, take on some guards, some tackles, trying to get up to that second level. So, I mean, I'm kind of right there with you. I'll be interested to see how they trot this thing out on Saturday,
Yeah.
especially with a group that is going to be RPO heavy in
Yeah.
Lenora Sellers and in Rocket Sanders. Very physical, hard to bring down. It'll be very interesting to see how they align the defense. But I will say this: I do have faith in the coaching staff and Blake Baker specifically. To it doesn't matter who you are, what your star rating is. They need the best 11. They're going to get them on the field.
Yeah.
Maybe that's a little optimistic. I just that's the feeling I get from this staff. Maybe different than in years past.
Yeah, and I guess my only pushback there would be, or I guess question would be, how different is the star position from what he played last year, which where they were calling kind of a hybrid Sam linebacker role? Like,
Yeah,
how different is it? Because look, for 8 months now, he's been repping primarily as a inside linebacker. They have not run him out there yet as kind of inside the lines, kind of hybrid safety kind of guy. Like, that just
yeah,
hasn't been his role that they've gone to since last year. I mean,
true.
it's been a year since he's done that. So I I think that there's a healthy mix here to where you can get him on the edge without having to make him a star or anything like that, and balance the kind of the inside linebacker and outside edge rusher role, to where he can have more of an impact. I just don't know if he can last as an inside linebacker though. If teams are seeing him, are they going to just start scheming for him to run? Okay, there's Perkins. We know we can block him.
Hmm.
Let's run right at him, kind of deal. And does he get
Yeah,
played off the field that way? And then do you have to kind of make the transition to, okay, well, now let's start putting him out there in practice at that star position, or or create kind of some kind of new role for him. There's It's complicated, man, because I do think he's talented. I think he's probably one of the more unique players in college football, and we're seeing it. Like, we're seeing how unique it is because
they
LSU just
can't,
can't figure it
I
out.
can't
Like, they
figure it
just
out.
they just haven't been able to find a way that he can be consistently impactful for 4 quarters in a game. I thought that he played extremely well the first quarter and a half against USC, but he disappeared in the second half. He had a couple
Yeah,
tackles, but he was a non-factor. He just didn't make many plays in the second half when you needed it most. So it's a toughie. It's a tough question, and I do think that you're gonna. I think this week in particular, you could see him a little bit more off the edge, coming as a more traditional pass rusher, standing up off the edge. I think he can kind of create a head of steam there and be able to beat some offensive linemen in that way. But when he is lined up at inside linebacker, I'm going to be extremely curious to see how many times Raheem Sanders is running right at him,
yeah,
and if and what kind of success he has, because I think the book is out now on just kind of, I don't want to say passive, but just how inefficient or ineffective he's been in being able to help stop the run. It's been primarily Whit Weeks and Greg Penn being able to do that from that linebacker spot, and they need Perkins to help in that way as well.
no, I completely agree. Going to be an intriguing matchup. Before we get out of here, let's get to prediction time. This line has started, I believe, at around 9.5, 8.5, has
Yeah,
slid down to 7.5. Glenn, I'm not touching this game. I
me
mean,
either.
at all. I'm not touching it. Just way too many factors. But how do you feel like this one shakes out? And what's your gut feeling here on Tuesday night? Obviously, a lot of things can change, but what's your gut feeling as we kind of get into our predictions here?
Yeah, look, gut feeling here is that LSU's passing offense will do enough to get them to win. I think that that's the group that you can really lean on right now. It's the best part of LSU's team is them from all angles. From a pass blocking perspective, they've been great. Nussmeier hasn't been sacked yet in 2 games. He's completing, I think, around 75, 76% of his passes, and he's done that without really having to utilize the long ball. I mean, he's
Yeah.
done a really nice job of working the short areas of the field, the intermediate parts of the field, getting the ball out quick. And I think if you get the ball out quick, obviously it's going to limit the effectiveness that this South Carolina defensive line can have on LSU. Um, so I like LSU to win this game. I don't know that it's going to be a particularly high scoring game. I would imagine that LSU is able to kind of stifle Sellers a little bit. I hope Savion Jones can have a big game. I hope they can get some pressure on Sellers. And Sellers is a guy we talked about a little bit, but he has 111 rushing yards, like in terms of net gain. But the
Yeah.
problem is he also has 54 yards loss,
Yeah.
which has come via sack.
Yeah.
Teams the first couple weeks have shown that they can get to him and get him behind the chains. And so I do think that's going to be another element here. Can LSU have a few possessions defensively where they get Arkansas behind the chains and get off the field in that way? Like that's going to be extremely important. So I do think LSU has the playmakers to go out and do that a couple times. I like the passing offense. I had this kind of in a 27-21, 27-23 kind of game. I think it's going to be tight. Like
Mhm.
I don't know that LSU covers that 6.5 or 6, whatever it winds up being prior to kickoff. But you have to have this game. You have to have this game, or your season. You hate to say it after week 3, but the season's over if you don't win this one.
Yeah. No, and I'm nearly right there with you. I had this game, was kind of looking at it, I had it very close, and I think Garrett Nussmeier will be able to lead a drive to kind of put the nail in the coffin there towards the end. So I actually had this one going 31-23. So a 24-23 game. LSU kind of gets that backdoor cover if you're a betting person. And is able to win this one. But it's going to be interesting, Glenn, because there's a lot of different factors. You mentioned the Sellers one. I wanted to throw one more stat out there. The reason South Carolina didn't put up a ton of yards against Kentucky, but as I get and currently I'm writing up my inside the numbers piece, they had 129 yards passing gained on just 5 plays. So they had explosive plays. 4 of those were over 23 yards. So they did go vertical. If that, that's going to be something that's going to be very interesting to watch. They've got some nice pieces at receiver. They've got some, different pieces they can utilize, like we talked about out of the backfield. But going to be interesting. You cannot allow the explosive plays. Kentucky did, and that really came back to hurt them in that ball game and made it easier for the South Carolina offense to score as well. But I think we all kind of feel like not putting my hard-earned money on this game. Too many factors up there in Columbia. But it's going to be LSU, South Carolina. You can catch all the coverage, obviously, here on Go 24/7 and over at the Big Spur. We'll link them down there below for LSU fans if you want the 24/7 scoop of all things South Carolina Gamecocks with the conversation they have going on over there about this game. 11 a.m. kick Central, 12 noon, going to be a fun one. And man,
Stay
we'll have
safe.
all the reactions. What'd you say?
Everybody stay safe. For the
Stay safe. It just started raining here, so we'll see how it goes. We got to get Glenn out to player interviews,
yeah.
but we'll catch you next time here on the Go 24/7 podcast.